We got a few things to talk about here today. We're going to introduce ourselves so you know who these lovely faces are, and then we're going to talk about pre-event, during the event, and post-event, all sorts of tricks and tips you can do. So, start us off. Hello, I am Selkooth Mind. You can call me Sel. I am the head organizer of Preventathon, which means I do a lot of just about a little bit of everything. I also am the founder of the Indie Explorer League and Canadians in Speedrunning. These are two newer groups that are still figuring out what they're doing, but similar to Preventathon, I'm doing a lot of organizational stuff. And as well, I'm also safety staff over at No Glitches Allowed.
My name is the Teachery. I historically made the joke that the place you would most likely find me is, behind the scenes of an event, and that's becoming less true, which is in a way kind of distressing to me, but funny. I am hosting staff for Preventathon with Selkooth Mind and fast-paced events with the likes of Argic and Amber Cyprin. I am also tech staff for fast-paced events, largely with pre-broadcast tech, the development of the OBS stack, helping people get tech checks, things like that. I am also games committee staff with Fast-Paced Events and with the Binary Breakers group. And as anyone who knows me will tell you, I will take on way too much if you let me. People usually have to remind me to practice self-care at some point during an online marathon, despite the fact that I'm in my own house. That's just how it goes.
Awesome. And hey, I'm Metroid Crime, she, any pronouns. I'm the founder and organizer of Lady Arcaders. We're an all-women and femme gaming collective we do a whole bunch of stuff with just gaming in general, not just speedrunning. And we have a volunteer staff of about 44 volunteers at this point. We train people, cross-train people between departments, and just get people more comfortable with being able to run their own events and types of things like that. I'm also the Frame Fatale's senior tech, so I help out in studio and also with a whole bunch of their tech stuff. I'm also the graphics and branding lead for No Glitches Allowed, which is a marathon with no glitches or low glitches. And I work on their layout and lead their graphics team. So yeah, that's me.
All right, so now that you've heard a little bit about us, we're going to talk about some things you can do before your event to improve how things are going to go. So first up, begin planning earlier than you need to.
Yeah, I can't really stress this one enough. We're actually going to cycle back around to it at the end because it's important then too. But sincerely, give yourselves more time than you think you'll need because in all likelihood, everyone who is working with you and you yourself in all likelihood are not paid. You are volunteers. You are giving what you do out of time and enthusiasm. But that means that real life comes first. So plan out what you can as far out in advance. I know people who are planning to do their first speedrun marathons. Historically, that's been we'll put this together 3 to 6 months. It'll go great. We've got an idea in mind. We know people. We'll find things to do. And then I know people at this event who have said, I'm putting together my marathon. I have a small staff already. I have an idea in mind. I have some thoughts for how I'd like to do things. We'd like to get it done in early 2027. And that's admirable. I think somewhere in between those two is really what you can be shooting for.
Yeah.
But yeah, I can't stress it enough. That's where this whole series of paragraphs came from.
Absolutely. And another thing I want to say is that there are so many speedrunning events now online. And you have to find a date that also works for you and that doesn't overlap with a whole bunch of other events that your volunteers are also participating in because there is so much volunteer overlap with the online speedrunning scene.
Yes, excellent point. Hararo is a good place to go. It is your friend. It is a good start.
Yeah.
Getting in touch with speedrun marathon organizers is another very important step because they are likely to have more access. Everybody talks. Everybody is trying to make sure to keep out of each other's way, generally speaking. Mm-hmm. So if you get in touch with people, if it's for that much, if it's for some of the other things we've suggested here, they will more than likely to be happy to help.
And sort of related to that as well, in that beginning planning earlier than you need to and conflicting with other events, decide if your event needs to be a charity event. I think I forgot to put this in the slides, but this is part of planning. Not every speedrun marathon needs to be a charity event. Raising money for charity is a fantastic thing. I run an event that's a charity marathon. But sometimes it's just fun to have an event that's just for speedrunning and just having fun. And the freeing part of that is you can pick whatever you want without worrying about, is this going to potentially bring in money for the charity. So that's part of planning. Do you need to be a charity event? And that should be one of the first things you think about.
It's a terrific point, and it really gets to the larger idea of scoping generally.
Yes.
How many days? Is it just one community or series of runs? Is it a variety thing? Will you have things that aren't speed runs? You know, do you have friends who want to do like a marathon that I'm going to be in later this month is doing a baking stream in the middle of the day because someone's really passionate about that and is good at baking, sweets that are like inspired by video games. There are groups like Zeldathon who regularly do what you might call interstitial segments, but they are simply entertainment that is based around things not video games. If you have been around in spaces like the board game room at Awesome Games Done Quick, you know exactly what kinds of things I mean. Games of Blood on the Clock Tower. And that's different amounts of planning and different sort of people that you need to be in touch with to make those things work.
All right, Crime, do you want to tackle this one?
Letting your volunteers branch out. Okay. So, one thing that I tend to do with Lady Arcaders is, not every event will get submissions for volunteer roles as much as other roles. Like, there are some roles in volunteering that tend to get, like, a lot of applicants, like hosting, for example, chat moderation. A lot of people just tend to apply for the same thing over and over. What is a good thing to do is to kind of like, people are not only interested in those things, they're also interested in some of the other roles. Like, there's so many people who I know who are like, oh, you're doing something really cool with social media, but I would never do social media type thing. Or tech is so cool, but I would never do tech type thing.
Let's be real. The tech pool for most events is very
It's
small.
the same people, yeah.
It
Same with
is, and
socials
is also
too,
the
yeah.
same people.
Yeah.
Correct. It is a valuable resource to have, but as Crime is saying, it is something that can be taught and can be learned. So if you are in a place where you can teach volunteers, absolutely do that. Strongly consider it.
Yeah. And like this point up here, asking the same people to do the same roles over and over leads to burnout, which is a very real thing. Like, if you're constantly always doing tech, you might just be like you might want to try something new. And what I find really helps is just like making it easy for people to jump from one role to another. By giving them like proper training, or like say you record videos when you do like your next event, you record tutorial videos that you can show to people to like give them a little bit more confidence to get into it. Having your leads just like, or like having a volunteer coordinator checking with your volunteers to make sure that, you know, they're feeling okay about what they're doing. Just trying to like positively encourage people to go outside of their comfort zone will just help a lot with burnout in general.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, you know, hi, hello, me, your resident jack of all trades over here. I'm not a lead organizer anywhere. You know, I haven't built one from the ground up, but I am the quintessential person who, when I saw something, went, ooh, shiny, how do I do that? And just dove into it. So people like Crime and Cell and the other people who've been gracious enough to take me on in new roles have helped teach me those things. In some cases, it was, you know, sitting on a Discord call late at night, tooling over OBS together. Don't expect that to be the case for most of your volunteers unless you're also willing to give that time. But Crime's idea was an excellent segue into the next section of what we have on this slide, which is the various different forms in which you can provide training materials to your volunteers, because that will empower them no matter what kind of learner they are, as whether you or not you believe in that as a teaching style sort of thing. I feel like a combined approach is really likely to be best because it accounts for, hey, they don't have a lot of time to devote to learning this thing. But if you have a video, if you can get everything and like common stumbling points in 60 minutes, then you at least have somebody who's up on the horse and has a general idea how to do things and avoid the sticking points for your marathon. You know, if you have like an an integration with a music player that sometimes has problems, they'll know that that's something to look out for. You can have it written in the guide as well, because that's super helpful to get into while you are in the marathon. You have kind of your list of tabs up in your browser, like, hey, here are the 3 or 4 things I need to bounce back and forth between to keep my head on a swivel during the event for the role that I'm doing. But you have a written guide, you have a video guide, and then live orientations are very much expected. I think you may find, especially for the more common role, the roles you might be expecting coming into a presentation like this, like hosting, that you may not get as much engagement during those orientations. It's as much kind of like a, okay, I'm the coach, I'm laying down the rules, here's how you do your job. But for a lot of other roles, the stuff that has hands-on, like tech-based roles, walking somebody through an OBS package, a Node.CG package, can help in a way that most people may not get from other forms of interaction.
Yeah, and I will just add to that, having any sort of guide is valuable. Do not feel you need to start off with all 3 of these. I'll say at Preventathon, we have written guides for every role, and we're starting to do live orientations for a lot of roles. We're working on the video guides. That's our 2025 sort of priority. Do not feel you need all 3 at once, but please, please, please have a guide of some sort. Because I have volunteered at events where there's been no guide for a role, and it's really scary as the volunteer. So that if you don't have a guide, please make that a priority to get one at least in some form for your people.
Another one of those things where if you reach out to other organizers, they are likely to like, if you, like me, are terrified of a blank page as far as how to get from A to B, reach out to other people and they can provide you tips. They can recommend, like, you know, even if they're just giving you the first 2 pages of their guide so you can see what their like table of contents looks like as some ideas.
Yeah, Lady Arcaders, we give our guides out to anyone who asks. So if you're looking for a template to start with at all, feel free to just reach out to me, and I can provide guides to even just start with, just to help out a little bit. You know, it's very daunting.
I can vouch, I used Lady Arcaders guides for Preventathon when we first started. Oh boy, Discord
Yay!
is a perfectly functional product, but it's actually fairly powerful and can do lots of good things for you. So forums are I don't want to call them new because they're not really new anymore. They've been around for a couple of years, but they're new-ish, I guess, and people don't always realize how to use them well. You can use them very effectively for organizing a marathon. Something that actually Preventathon borrowed from Lady Arcaders is we create, for every single run, we create a forum and we put a thread in each forum for every run. And this is where the runners and the commentators get collected together. They connect them with their hosts, connect them with producers. This is where space where if there's big tech questions, the tech volunteers, tech leads can come in and chat with them. And it can be everything all focused rather than all of this occurring in, say, like a runner general chat.
Right. It's a combination of having the notes you need for your run in one place in a pre-event sense and making it easier during the event for people like production, setup assistants to be able to check back in an organized place. Like everybody's on the same page. You know that during the event, if something goes wrong and everyone is panicking, as they inevitably will be, that there is a source of truth that you can go back to rather than pushing for the producer, or if you are the producer, rather than having to get in touch with the runner themselves to say, hey, if we meet this incentive, can it be done during this point in the run? You know, you have that information organized and ready to go. If your producer wants to pull it into, you know, a local place for themselves, that's fantastic. But having it ready for them so that they don't have to do that work on the day of is invaluable.
Absolutely, and it's also a great way to see if you're, depending if you have like commentary buddy systems or you want your hosts to reach out to your runners and such so and forth. It's just great to be able to see, oh, there's something happening here. That there's no, like, it's not like there's no communication happening between the runner and the host, and then we're going to be blindsided about it the day of, type thing.
Yeah, excellent point. It allows you to help keep people accountable if necessary, and to just make sure that those things are running smoothly in the lead up to an event.
Or
Yeah,
to
absolutely.
head off problems as well. Sometimes you get a host and runner pair that just do not vibe well. It lets you know in advance that, hey, maybe we need to see if we can adjust the schedule or something or whatever.
Or step in, yeah. from
Because
an
we have
organizational-
time to see it and know what's happening.
Yeah. Another thing I do suggest regarding Discord, this isn't on the slides, but I remembered it. There's so much information happening in Discords. Like you can hide and show channels and whatever, but it's definitely worth it just for your organization if you're planning on doing like more than one event. Even is to have a Discord server just for your volunteers or your major staff or whatever to just plan things out and have it all in one place, just like a repository or database of all the information you need. And that way you can use form threads on both the public side and the private side if you want to do communicating about like tech issues or like there's an issue with the runner and the commentator, but you don't want the volunteers and runners to see it versus like the staff. So that's also just a very useful thing to keep in mind. It kind of organizes things a little bit better. Oh yeah, and Discord webhooks. Discord actually makes it very easy. Like if you have like any sort of simple programming knowledge at all, Discord makes it very easy to be able to post messages into Discord without having a bot of any kind. So like if you go into any channel on Discord, you can hit like Discord webhooks, and it just gives you an endpoint that you can contact on Discord server that just takes a JSON input to be able to populate like a message, like if you wanted to have it so that you could notify runners, oh, your run's coming up in 30 minutes. Here's an automatic ping that your producer can send out that sends out all the information about the run, the estimate, it pings all the runners, it pings all the tech all at once. That's a thing that you can do. And it's really not too difficult to set up if you already have some sort of tech system. And just kind of like ties everything a little bit more together. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very helpful thing. Branding, crime. I think this is sort of your expertise here.
Branding is so important. I cannot stress this enough. If you want people to remember your event, if you want it to be something that people can like show off proudly that hey, they were on your event, you should have some decent branding for your event, just to kind of tie everything together. It's very important to seek out someone who has some sort of UI experience or graphical interface experience to be able to make your layouts for your event, to be able to make sure that all the information is communicated clearly, having a consistent logo, having consistent branding across all your media and your socials is just so important for people to like pick up your event as a thing to look out for.
Yeah, as somebody with a marketing background, in a fashion, what you want to have is you want somebody who is like just waking up and bleary-eyed to be able to tell like, hey, color scheme, logo design, generally, oh yeah, I know who that is. Mm-hmm. Everything that you've ever picked up and recognized from the bottle before you fully read what it was, that's consistent branding. That's the ability to like, and you don't have to be devoted solely to one kind of structure for it. You could have like, here's our branding for our winter event, and it usually looks like this, and here's our branding for our fall event. That's the kind of thing that can give somebody a cadence of like, oh, hey, I'm watching this VOD later. I know it's from the winter event, even if I just full screened the video, because the rest of the layout looks the way that it was when I ran in that event a year ago.
Oh, social media. This is a fun one.
Social media also very, very important, but it tends to be one of those roles that a lot of people don't really want to do. And understandably, I mean, the landscape of like with X and everyone split off into like Blue Sky and such, and then like, do you use Instagram? Do you use TikTok, etc.? Advertising your event, like clear dates about like, this is when submissions are opening, this is when it's happening, doing some sort of countdown to let people know that your event is happening in X amount of weeks, doing some sort of lead up to the event to publicize your runners in any sort of way, or your runs or your event, excellent. The more people see that, they'll come visit. And the thing about it is with social media, you have to keep hammering at it. There is just, it's the algorithm is awful. And no one will see your things unless you're posting like multiple times, like per week. And especially they definitely prioritize videos. So if you've ever done an event before, grabbing clips, having people take clips from previous events for a video editor to use, or someone in social media just post like simple clips of like funny moments. Super important.
Yeah, and or if you're just spooling up for your first event.
Yes, exactly.
Get video
Yep.
from your runners explaining, why they should watch the run or some quick gameplay, something that can feed the machine.
Yeah, exactly. And I will say another thing about social media is one thing that we've been working on recently is splitting the social part from the media department, basically, because we have a lot of people who really love doing like graphics and video editing, and then people who are, but they do not want to write any copy for social media whatsoever. But then when you have some people who are like, oh yeah, no, I love writing, so like having those roles like partially split but still be under the same like media department can be a useful way to get people more involved with the event. Yep.
All right, games committee. This is
Yeah, this
where-
one's primarily me. This is something that I have strong feelings about. I'm certainly I welcome comments
Yes.
and other thoughts from people who have also done it, which is both of the people over here and probably some folks out in the audience. I am a perennial homework doer. Always have been, probably always will be. So for me, games committee is like, hey, basically there are several ways you can take it, and I think any of them are valid. And I will take a step back and say, look at these options, look at other options from people you talk to, select one you think you'll like, keep it internally consistent with a rubric for how you and your volunteers should work with it. Do it for that event, review, and switch things up if you need to. For me, there's a system that I particularly like that is complicated enough that when I explained it to Selkuth Mind, she was like, all right, we need to sit down and like actually break this thing out and try it. It is a system where rather than having everybody look at the list of games that were submitted and kind of give maybe like a yes, no, maybe sort of rubric, we use a scoring rubric, and we give each of our volunteers, of which there are usually 10 to 15, that much of the schedule. And the expectation there is that everybody with maybe 10 to 15 to 20 runs each will take the time to watch portions of the run, whether it's being scrubbed through or if you are particularly enticed. We had one funny situation where one of our games committee staffers said, I wasn't sure how I felt about this run, and then it was a half an hour later, and then I watched the run a second time, like later that night, and I don't know what it was, but we have to have this run in the event. And they gave it the highest score that they could, despite being completely unfamiliar with it before the run. That very complicated system, I'll be honest, uses to filter out who gets what runs. We use an intake form to say, hey, what kind of runs do you like? And there are a couple of us, myself included, who are basically, hey, whatever's left, send it our way. I rated a Toho FPS in the Doom engine. I rated Stay Human 2, which is a game that's like entirely in first person and has some physics bits that are maybe stomach churny for your audience, those sorts of considerations. But me, I like having a really meaty explanation, a couple of paragraphs even per run. And I think that's excessive for most people. If you're going to hold anyone to a higher standard, yourself or staff. But the most important things, I think, are pick a system that works for you and your volunteers. If you want to do an informal poll to say, hey, how much games committee do you want, essentially? Do you want 1 scoop, 2, or the entire pint? And then give them concrete examples of like, hey, here's what a 5 out of 5 looks like. Here's what you should be thinking. If you are thinking along these lines, that's probably a 2 out of 5. And if you are an event where you have some very specific grounding, like we don't accept runs that contain excessive gore, because of the nature of the charity that we're raising money for, or, when the event is, make sure that you are very clear that like, these are the circumstances. If you're not sure if this run should be scored a, do not or a 0, reach out to an organizer. And then I think it also behooves you, especially if you are still new in whatever process you're using, if it's been less than 2 events, check in with your games committee members regularly. Say, hey, how's it going? Would you like less or more runs? It doesn't hurt to have multiple people review the same, but you want a plurality, if not a majority, of your games committee members reviewing each run if you are using a system where you need multiple yes votes to get a run in. If you are using something more complicated, and feel free to reach out to me to ask me about what the marathon, that as fast-paced events that I'm talking about uses, where it is kind of a, hey, we each take our slice and then we bring it together and say, here's why I felt this way. You can read what I wrote and we can watch a few minutes of the video together. That is a very involved process comparatively, and I'm not telling anyone that they need to do it that way. But, we make it fun. I enjoy it. But again, as complicated as you and your volunteers are comfortable with, an internally consistent system driven by a rubric, and then assess afterwards and see how you like. Poll your volunteers, say, hey, how did you like it? Do you feel like you had enough time to review what you reviewed? Those sorts of things.
Another thing I want to say is another good way to do that type of thing is like when you're building your games committee, if you don't always have like the same staff and you're looking to like fill a games committee, it's always good to like poll people what kind of genres they like, and then when they're reviewing the games, give them those genres to review. Obviously, it depends on how many, like when you're building your games committee, you probably want to have a mix of it so that when you go to split up games, not one person gets like a whole bunch of the one type of genre.
If you get 6 responses that all say RPG, please.
Yeah, or like,
oh, well.
2 horror blocks like we constantly have. So that type of thing. Another thing that's really useful to look out for beforehand when your games committee is if you are doing a charity event, keep in mind what incentives the game has and how engaging like the run actually is. Like having notes, like consistent and like detailed notes when you are going through and watching a run is so important, I think, especially for communicating with the rest of the members, because not everyone's going to watch every single video or like the entirety of the video even. So just having those like you were saying, like a rubric to tell everyone like, oh, this is what you should kind of be looking out for is so useful.
Yeah, very good thoughts. With that, we have moved into things that are important during the event. And we're going to start off with some special volunteer roles. First of which is producers. Different events will define this differently. In the events that I run, this is essentially someone who's brought on, you give them a certain degree of sort of junior staff-like powers in a way. They are responsible for making decisions in the moment. They are deciding the flow of things, what's the pacing, what's happening next, aiding in making decisions about, hey, something has happened and we need a backup run, which run are we pulling, getting all that set up, directing traffic with volunteers. That's how we run it, but other events, Crime, T, do you have thoughts on the producer role otherwise?
For this role, I mean, it's different with Lady Arcaders because we have like perma staff who we have as producers. Like we will take some people on as producers, but like they're generally like the most trusted role just because they get the highest access for everything, and also like they are basically in charge while they are running it. So they can do anything, so you got to trust them.
Right. Yeah. If the place that you're looking to get to, and this will usually happen after a couple of events 1 and 2, it's probably going to be staff doing this the entire time. Mm-hmm. But the most events treat this as an invite-only role, which, to Crime's point about trust, that needs to be there. You are giving, the word I thought Selkuth Mind was going to use earlier was autonomy. You are giving them a certain level of autonomy within the scope of their job to do what they need to do. And ideally, at that point, you will be able to step back and let the marathon take care of itself in large part, aside from, your advisory role. Again, to her point about, different marathons do this differently. If you don't mind popping up the next 2 sections, a lot of marathons combine this with the third role here, Games Committee on Call, where they will say producers are also part of the hey, when do we open this incentive process? Whether or not they are the same role in your event, having these 2 roles work in close concert is very important, because production can't do what they do if decisions about these sorts of things aren't made. So that's a lot of during event conversations. Again, if you want to have that in channels that are specifically for that kind of conversation, I think that can make things a lot cleaner than production or like the the on-air channel, essentially.
Yeah.
You want that to just be clean for like the runners to communicate issues and hey, here's what's coming up with the next run. Keep it clean enough that even if somebody forgets to pin things, it's still easy to go find stuff, whether you are a runner or a producer.
Yeah, I think the games committee, honestly, games committee on call was like one of the most important things that I think I implemented recently with our events. Like, because honestly, they're the ones who are reviewing the games. Like, they know best for everything. If there's ever an issue, like, the producers can just be like, hey, games committee, this person's not showing up. What game are we putting on backup? For them to be able to make decisions about that and, like, them handling the opening of the incentives and closing of the incentives, because the producers just have so much else going on at the same time. And honestly, like, games committee just, like, they'll know what to do. And I think that, like, honestly, just having them made our event run so much more smoothly last time, because, like, you know, when incentives get open, they can just immediately, they go ping the host, they go ping the runners, and they let live production know, and then it's all just, like, done, and producers are just still running the show without having to worry about anything else.
Yeah, for sure. Those rules, once you get big enough, make a lot of sense to split out, in my experience. We did that at the last Preventathon. I want to talk about flex volunteers. This is something I'm personally kind of passionate about, is sometimes you'll get people who will apply to volunteer, and they kind of have experience doing a little bit of everything. They might apply for some specific roles as well, but they maybe want to dabble in a little bit of everything throughout the event. And so this is what a flex volunteer is for. This is someone who essentially, it depends. The way that Preventathon runs it is you are scheduled for certain times to be flex, and you are essentially the person on call. So a volunteer no shows or has an emergency or something comes up, maybe there needs to be an extra hand on tech or on socials, whatever it is, that's the first person you call, is the flex person. And they are the ones who come in and help. And this then frees up your staff from having to jump into that situation. So, you know, if, say, your host suddenly becomes ill mid-run, pull your flex volunteer and they can host, and it can be decided maybe your host lead jumps in eventually, or maybe we just let the flex volunteer handle it. But it gives that extra layer of just security over everything. And it's a good way for some people who have knowledge in a lot of things to get to, you know, practice a bit. And sometimes it's just an easy chill shift where they're just on call for like 3-4 hours and they don't have to do anything, but they get to just kind of vibe. So, yeah.
Okay, daily recaps from producers. This is also a thing that's really helped out, especially for, like, I love taking notes and note keeping and all that stuff, because honestly, like, things happen so rapidly during events. Like, if you don't write it down, you're never going to remember to bring it up later. So basically what I have my producers do is just, like, write kind of like a daily recap at the end of the day, or if there's something happening, like, we just basically make a thread in Discord and a channel for each day, and just kind of like, so if it's sometimes me, sometimes the producer who's going to be on that day, but, like, just doing a quick rundown of here's everything that's happening for this day, just so, like, the producers who is on shift, like, knows, like, if there's we have an 8-person Stardew Valley race, and that's going to require some extra setup time, or we have this runner who's kind of been a bit, not really communicating, kind of shows up late, so just, like, be on the lookout for that. You might need have, like, just, like, notes about, like, the event that's happening. And then afterwards, the producer, like, as soon as they finish their shift, they just write up notes about, oh, this went wrong, this went wrong, this went right, this runner or this volunteer did such a good job, I want to shout them out, and let's make sure to accept them next year, type thing. And just having those also, like, so you can look back on them for, like, post-event meetings, super, super helpful information.
See, this is funny because I read this bullet point and thought something different, but I think it can feed from the same information. I feel like a daily recap that actually goes out to your stream, which can be informed by something like this, is a really good way to get into content other than just speedrun, break, speedrun, break. It gives, especially if you put it at the beginning of your day, it gives tech staff extra time to get the first run ready. It gives people who are still just coming in something else to watch rather than just sitting at an empty screen with music playing. It's even something that you could syndicate to socials later. And say like, hey, here's what we have going on today. Maybe you got to it an hour later and you've missed the first run, but the other 4 minutes of that is still going to be valuable for people just coming in.
Yeah, for sure. And it adds a little extra for something for people to watch, which goes to our next point, which is something I'm also very passionate about, is if you're doing a charity event, having videos from the charity or having an interview, if you can arrange that with someone from the charity staff, is so huge. It makes such a difference in engagement from the audience. I've found in my experience it tends to improve donations a little bit. And especially with an interview, if it's something that if you're going to plan this ahead of time, you can sometimes put out a questionnaire to your community and go, hey, do you have questions for the charity? And you can ask those live during the interview and get people the information they're curious about.
Yeah, it also helps to be in contact with your charity and ask them what if they have a list of videos or a press kit. Make sure to also check with their branding, because they probably have specific restrictions about how you can use and when you can use certain assets. But just all of those things to just tie yourself in more with the cause you're raising funds for is always a good thing.
Yeah, and if you happen to be working with a charity that's maybe not super tech savvy or super familiar with things, you might have to gather some of this yourself. Like Preventathon, we work with a Canadian charity called Little Warriors, who they're fantastic, and they've got lots of great resources for in-person events. And so in the past 4 years that I've worked with them, both for solo and now with Preventathon, I've had to teach them a few things, and they've improved some of their resources because of me. But I've also had to go and dig up some stuff myself from their YouTube channel and that, but with permission and flexibility, because they've recognized that, hey, my needs as the organizer of an event is different from most of their in-person things. So yeah, great point. Talk to your charities, please.
Yeah, it can even go to the point where, if the thing that is most important to you is raising money for a cause you are very passionate about, and it has to be at, let's say, a global scale. You want to raise money for something that is not just making a difference in your country of origin or the country in which the event is taking place. We had one with fast-paced events where I was I basically made the pitch deck to sell the idea of what is speedrunning, well, why do we do stuff for charity, and how can you get involved to them? And we sat down with their head of HR and one of the first people organizing that charity, and talked to them and said hey, here's what we are, here's what we do, here's how you get on to Tiltify. And here's the things that we could ask of you beyond that. That would be super cool. You don't have to do any of these, but they did. They went outside into a city center together and recorded a video of this is where we're from. This is why it's important to us. And here's they were specifically a lobbying organization, GATE, or Global Action for Trans Equality, which is specifically about working with, they're an NGO, so they work with other NGOs and they work with governments to help legislate and explain, describe, draft, and review legislation. So they gave us a walkthrough of one of their home cities and explained here's where trans equality and rights are where we are, and we want to help bring the changes that we've been able to make palpably to everywhere around the world. That was super cool. It just, sometimes it takes extra steps. Obviously, don't feel obligated to do any of that, but if that is something that you are passionate about, you may find that a charity that's never considered being raising money online before is something that you can bring in relatively easy through platforms like Tiltify.
Yeah, I will also mention, this is going back to the branding thing, but you were talking about how you might have to show a charity or something what you're all about. Having a media kit is such a good thing to have. Being able to kind of have a portfolio of here's all the things we do, here's what we're about in 2 paragraphs. Here's how much money we raised at our previous event. Here's the causes we've raised for. Here's what our community statistics. Something like that goes a long way in trying to even like if you want to eventually pull sponsorships or stuff like that. Just having that, like especially all nicely branded with all your nice branding colors and logos, it goes a long way.
All right, tech blocks. So things will happen. Things will go wrong. Tech will inevitably go sideways during an online event. This is just the reality of running an event. Something that can be really great once you get a little more comfortable with like the basics of running and scheduling an event is to schedule in tech blocks of some form. The way that we tend to do this at Preventathon is in the form of we'll just play like an extra long charity video, and that gives us some time. But if we're really behind, we just cut the video.
Just, try not to play it twice during the same day. If you can
Yes,
help
let's
it.
not play the same 15-minute video twice in one day. But things like that. And it doesn't have to just be like, here's 30 minutes of nothing. You can schedule something else to exist there. But it's sort of like the checkpoints here at AGDQ,
Exactly.
where it's flexible. If they have more time, great, they'll do more content. If they don't have a ton of time, they'll do a little bit of something, and then they move on to the next thing. Putting in space for things to go sideways is very, very, very valuable and something that's sort of the next level in terms of building schedules.
Okay, so this actually wasn't what I thought it was.
Okay.
But one thing I do want to mention is because of like schedule drift and because there are tech issues, I like to schedule the like behind the scenes thing. Anyone who's not a performer, so like hosts and runners like get scheduled according to like the run. But I like to set it up so that the people working behind the scenes have like a set like 4 hours, and then you switch like regardless of where the run is. So that you don't end up with like burnt out staff who, we're like 2 hours behind and now this person feels like they're stuck here and they're so tired. But just like having things scheduled like on regular blocks for the behind the scenes is super useful. And then ideally you'd have like either a producer or flex volunteers who could handle like we're now 2 hours over, so we need someone else to fill in type thing. Scheduling it also just makes it so that like like your tech people and like behind the scenes people will be expected to be there at a certain time. It's not like they have to be watching the schedule and it's like, oh, I thought this was going to end 30 minutes later type thing.
Yeah, that's also a really great point about scheduling your volunteers. All right, defending your volunteers from harassment. This will happen eventually, especially if you get big enough.
So honestly, people will kind of complain, and I mean, sometimes they're valid complaints, but sometimes you just have the same people always complaining about the same things, and sometimes they're not nice about it. And honestly, like, that it sucks and it's going to happen, but it's really important to have like your volunteers back on that type of thing. Like if someone doesn't pass the vibe check, like boot them from the event. Just don't put your staff or volunteers or anyone through that. It is not worth it. You want people to keep helping out with your event. You don't want someone to have like a terrible experience at one event and then never apply to volunteer again, or just like never get involved with your event again. That hurts so much.
Yeah, there was a point in the past, and maybe this will become an opportunity at some point again in the future, depending on how social media ebbs and flows, where you used to be able to use regular expressions in the search bars of social media groups to basically vet runners, volunteers, etc. You could look at the last several months of their social media. It's still hypothetically possible, but now it's basically a manual process. So, bless you if you choose to go that way. But it's, now if it is a vibe check as much as anything else, you give somebody you give somebody very clear expectations as far as what they are to do, and then either staff or people like producers who are deputized to work on behalf of are given the full expectation that, hey, if they go outside of these bounds, whether it's once is a warning, twice is you're out, however you are comfortable doing things, make sure that you and the people that you have deputized to take those actions stick to those guidelines regardless. You give somebody too many chances, and they make it the idea that, hey, it's okay if I act out a little bit. They'll just tell me when I'm doing it wrong, and then I'll go right back to what I was doing because that's what I know.
Yeah. Also, legitimately, if someone just is doing something that's just bad and you don't have they're not like specifically breaking a rule, like they're like skirting the rules so hard, like that is a thing that people do. Um, just ban them. You don't have to justify it. Sorry, you don't have to justify it if like they're just like completely ruining it for everyone else. Yeah.
Yeah. I'd also add this extends if you're a head organizer. This extends to your staff.
Yes.
Protect your staff.
Yeah.
Like, please do that. All right, post-event. So you've finished your event. Now, what are some good things that you should do? Feedback forms. These are very valuable. You can learn some things, but we do also have some caveats on that. My personal tip, as someone who finishes an event and then usually passes out from exhaustion for like a week, write them in advance. That's a really pro tip. Just because the feedback form goes out at the end of the event doesn't mean you have to write it after the event. You can write this like 5 months before the event, and it's good to go. Maybe you'll tweak it during the event if you realize there's a question that needs to be added, but have it ready to go in advance so you can just send it out. Don't be me. Write it in advance.
And realistically, the feedback window that you're going to get most of the feedback in and the forms that you send out, outside of people you have to ping a couple of times, which you should remind people a few days later, but like 12 to 48 hours. The people who are going to fill it out will probably do so within that span of time. So if it's ready to go, then that's how you're going to capture that feedback.
Yeah, and literally, like, you can, if you're doing it, like, through Google Forms or something, which is a very useful tool, like, you can just duplicate it for every event. You probably don't have to change it at all, aside from, like, change the year it happens in. This is this point here about people will complain about any decision you make. Try to have fun with the experience. You're gonna get obviously most of the time the feedback you're gonna get is gonna look much more negative than positive because people are not gonna submit feedback forms when they have a good time. So if you're looking at your event and you're like, oh man, everyone like hated this, it's not the case. So like obviously like you're gonna get people like I think. God, I had a really baffling response on a feedback form recently where they were like, oh yeah, I love the event. And it's like, would you ever come to the event in person again? And they're like, no, the tech was really bad. And I'm like, okay, so wait, why did you rate everything else so highly so it was just like, you got to take like people's feedback sometimes with a grain of salt. Like you never know exactly why they might be saying something. Hopefully, if there is an issue, you'll have multiple points of reference, so that like if you see that there's like a trend, that's maybe something you need to pay attention to. But sometimes people are just negative to be negative, so you kind of have to consider that too.
Sure, or one particular thing gets stuck in their craw. And
Yeah,
it's like,
yeah,
hey,
yeah.
I enjoyed the whole event a lot less because this thing happened, and that colors everything else. To very gently push back, I think a lot of what you can get feedback on, if you've ever worked with polling in any way because of your job, you may know that the way in which questions are phrased can really strongly influence the kind of answers you get back. And it's worth sitting down with somebody else if you are the person making these feedback forms and asking for like, hey, can you check, am I biasing the kinds of answers I'm going to get back with these questions? And is that what we want to do? Because in some cases, you might want to. Like for hosts, something that I'm very passionate about is making sure that as many of my host volunteers as possible are more confident coming out of an event than they were going into it. And a lot of what, the way I organize hosting departments is intended to do that, giving them more orientations, giving them support during their shift, both generally in terms of resources and in terms of having somebody there who can answer questions for them, gas them up, whatever they need, to the point where what I actually want to do going forward is to have a host intake form and be able to say like, hey, what do you enjoy about this role? Even if they don't know, that's fine, but it's basically to be able to serve their needs in the way in which they think they need, and then also help gently form if there are places where it's like, well, your expectation is good, but here's a way to make that work better for you instead, and really help people have those aha moments. But that is, that's during the event, and then after the event, you want to check and see, hey, did I achieve those goals? Are there ways that I need to change how I'm orienting things, the questions I'm asking, too many questions based on what kind of feedback you do or don't get back? Many volunteers will only fill out part of a feedback form, and that's totally okay too.
Yeah, if you're uncertain about how to write a good feedback form, do a little bit of research into survey design. There's lots of good resources out there written for like intro university psych level stuff. I'm very confident of that because I have a master's in psychology. I have done multiple courses in survey design, so I'm very comfortable in it, but that's because I've had additional training in it. There's lots of good resources, go look it up. The great TLDR of feedback forms is if multiple people are consistently complaining about the same thing, it's probably something you should pay attention to. If it's a one-off, take it with a bit more of a grain of salt. That's
Right.
10 out
And
of
that
10
bullet
approach.
point here actually also kind of flows into the next couple of bullet points. I wouldn't explicitly say you should tell your volunteers no. I wouldn't recommend that. But what I mean is, as part of a debriefing with your staff, consider everything that comes up in terms of actionable feedback, but be willing to say, hey, you were the person who was on call for that. You were their producer. Did you get the sense that this is how they were feeling, or did they just come out of left field with this? Did they express something to you and you were like, hey, I'm sorry, I can't meet that need right now. I have too much else going on, and that's why they feel that way. If so, you can make changes to facilitate that better. If not, it may be something that you ultimately don't consider actionable at this time.
All right, but no, seriously, start planning earlier than you need to. That's
Yeah,
a big one.
That's why it shows up again here, because this is the time to start planning for the next one.
Yeah, and post-event meeting with staff is so important. That's like, it basically sets you up for your next event. So you've already started planning your next event when you're closing your previous one. Just having one place where you can list everything that went right, everything that went wrong. Shout outs to this person did great. This person we probably don't want back next time, either as a runner or performer. Maybe they weren't as strong on a tech role and you want to shift them towards something else. Maybe you think they would be better at. Figuring out like how overworked your leads were, how overworked your producers were. If you had a lot of like changes you had to make, if this game schedule worked. There's so many things to consider at a post-event meeting, and it's also just like a really nice way to like hang out with your volunteers afterwards. Honestly, like
For sure, yeah.
super wholesome.
Depending on when you had it, depending on how many other events are around yours, you maybe give staff and volunteers that you're inviting to this meeting a week or two
Yeah,
to
yeah.
decompress. But you also don't want to take too long, because at that point you might start losing the connection between, oh, when I wrote this note, it was because of X, but I didn't write it clearly enough to, remember it a month later because it was in the moment. That's what was being asked of me, to make this bullet point about, hey, we need to cycle back with this person about role X, responsibility Y, etc.
Yeah, which is also why it's important to have those like daily recaps about, hey, here's everything that went wrong on this day specifically, because then you can refer back to that, and especially cross-referencing people's feedback forms, like, oh, this person said this about this. Oh, it's because this happened to them during the event. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Are there any other thoughts that we have before we go to questions?
I don't think so. I think that's everything I wanted to mention.
Okay. We might think of something during question period or after. Who knows? We'll see. But now we have time for some questions. If you have a question, I'm going to ask you to please come walk up. We have a mic here, just so that everyone can hear you. If you have a question, yeah, come walk up and ask into the mic, please.
Hey there, you mentioned Discord webhooks. Do you know, does Discord can you do webhooks with Aurario, or like, it's just so you can pull from the schedule for during the event?
You'd
for
probably have to
setting those
have
up?
some sort of external service to do so.
Got
Like,
it.
someone probably have to write a script. Like, I have Lady Arcaders has our own database of stuff, but
Cool.
also we also pull from Hararo. So like, it pulls to Lady Arcaders database, and then from there it'll update the times and everything. Relies on all that. And so we have the info in one certain place that we can send it to. So if there was like some sort of like it would have to have some sort of cross-referencing script. Like, I don't know if you could use something like if this then that also.
Got it.
Like those types of automated services, because I know you can send like, or like Zapier, things like that. Any one of those services just as an intermediary between the two.
God bless Zapier, honestly.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
Hi. So my main question was, so as like event organizers, where do you strike that balance between like bringing back like longtime hosts that people all really care about, and also like bringing in new volunteers, like new hosts or new runners and whatnot?
Yeah, absolutely. That comes down as much to having a process and making everybody go through it the same way. You know, if you are a fledgling event, you will probably be inviting hosts in addition to whatever process you do to fill out your roster. But much like Games Done Quick does, you should have a process like depending on the time you have and the staff you have to devote to it as a resource, you can have an audition process that has like, hey, here are the list of donations we want you to read off of. We want you to make an audition that's approximately X minutes long. If you can do it like Games Done Quick used to do, where you work against pre-recorded video and have your hosts kind of weave a story through that. Tell them, hey, first X minutes, you are introducing yourself, you are whatever the case may be, and then go into working alongside the run, reading donations. I often specifically encourage hosts, hey, we know it's not going to be perfect. We'd like you to record, at the very least, record the whole thing in a single continuous take. You know, the kinds of things that can help people calm their nerves, encourage people to talk to you before they finish recording those, because people are going to get up inside their own heads about that. But again, make it a process that everybody has to adhere to, whether they are returning, whether they are staff, or whether they are new, so that it is as fair as it can be for everyone.
For me personally, like I have like trusted staff basically that I will have on almost every event. Like we like to cycle some new people in every once in a while, like for games community positions. But like in general for the volunteer positions, like hosting, socials, tech, et cetera, et cetera. I like to do about like if we get the numbers, like half new, half returning. That way we make sure to not like burn people out, but we also give people the experience. Like I love taking first time hosts. It's like one of my favorite things. Like if they have a great, like they're still gonna audition like everyone else, but like giving someone the opportunity to do that type of thing is just like it's really cool. And then like obviously like check about like where you're slotting them to just make sure they're not overwhelmed, and like give them all the support that they need, etc. type thing.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
Or
Yeah.
another thing that I would just add really quickly is sometimes we've offered like shadow shifts where someone is maybe they're like, hey, I'm curious about volunteering with tech, but I'm not like super confident. Okay, you can either just shadow, or you can shadow someone for a shift, and then you get a shift later in the event. We've done that at Preventathon for a few different roles, and we've had some good success bringing in new people that way. Sometimes they do the shadow and they go, actually, I really don't want to do this role again. Cool, great, they've learned that. But
Yeah.
sometimes they'll come back and they'll go, hey, I want to do this again, and they'll apply again to future events.
Yeah, we also let people shadow in any department, whether they applied for it or not. Like if someone's like, I just applied, like I am interested in socials, but I don't want to do it this event. Like we allow people to sit in on orientations. They can like sit in on a shift if they want to learn how to do anything. That's like, it just encourages like cross department, like learning. Yeah.
With hosting in particular, especially for an online event, I think I have historically found or gotten feedback from my host volunteers that host ghosting or host menteeship isn't super valuable in terms of like actually following them around and being in the same channel, because the production notes that hosts get aren't super extensive. But having the ability to ask a host either during their shift or shortly after, hey, this decision you made was like, it made the flow of that run really turn around. The runner was hard on themselves and you were able to jump in a way that was, what made you make that decision, or how did you know to do that? That's the sort of thing that I think can be really helpful for somebody just finding their legs in hosting.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think we're at time for one more question,
Okay.
if there's any other questions. All right.
So I know this can be a big question, but for somebody looking to run an online marathon, what is the approach to getting the tech set up all figured out, like how to get everybody connected and online and streaming all together? I know that's a big question.
It's a big question, but there are a lot of there's a few places you want to start. Depends. You want to find someone who has some sort of experience in tech already, like whether they do their own like Twitch streams, or like you can find a programmer or something. But generally, like there's a bunch of like you're just gonna take like an OBS setup and work from there. I can like there's a lot to cover on this topic. But you're basically just like you want an OBS with a layout, and then you want to be able to capture audio from Discord and be able to record people's video feeds. Easiest way to honestly get started is just like set up your OBS package, set it up to capture on Discord, and then you would have like your runners stream to like a Twitch channel that's not public. And from there, you're going to pull in everything together and broadcast it out. Obviously, like there's a bunch of tools. Like there's a tool called NodeCG, which is like generally what people use for events, and it hooks into like Hararo, so that you can like program your entire schedule and then just like hit next to go to the next run to update the overlay type thing. But it's basically you'd want to look up like NodeCG, and I think there's like a bunch of public packages that even like GDQ has out.
Speed control is the most
Speed
common
control,
one.
yeah. There's one called Speed Control. But you don't even have to get that fancy. Like, honestly, you just need to be able to capture a stream and display it out. So however you go about that. Also, like, if, like I said, Lady Arcaders is willing to, like, show anyone what we do for tech, because our system is very, like, layered. We don't have, like, anything super, super complicated. So if anyone's ever curious, just feel free to reach out to me. I can throw you some resources.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you all for coming. If you have further questions, I'm sure the three of us will be hanging out here for a little bit afterwards. I'd be happy to chat with you further. But
And
also,
to anyone watching the VOD, this presentation has also very much been for you, because odds are you are online relative to the event. You are interested in making online events. Feel free to reach out to us and ask for things and see if we can help you.
Yeah.
I guess where would be the best place for everyone to find us? Crime?
Oh, yeah. You can find me twitch.tv/MetroidCrime. You can also just send me a DM on Discord. You can Metroid_crime there. And I'm always willing to help out. Or if you want to email me, m@metroidcrime.com. Please feel free to send me an email.
Yeah, very similar. Discord and Blue Sky, same name as you're seeing on your screen right now. I'm always happy to, I work in IT, so I'm going to tell you the same thing I would say there. I'm always happy to take a question, and if I don't know, I'll at least point you in the right direction.
Yeah, and if you got questions for me, you can find all my socials at selcouthmind.neocities.org. I'm also on Discord, selcouthmind. Yeah, you can send me a message. Happy to help. But yeah, thank you all for coming. Thank you for GDQ for letting us run this panel, and have a fantastic rest of the event.